Again, Andrew, thanks for taking the time to chat. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Andrew Orloff. I'm one of the co-founders of Zoic Studios, a visual effects company focused primarily in broadcast visual effects. It's been around, we're coming into our 19th year. I'm officially the creative director and president of the BC office, which is our main production hub. We also have offices in Los Angeles and New York. And most recently, I've also taken on the title and responsibilities of head of our real-time group. So heading up the creative and technical leadership for the entirety of our real-time effort, mostly centered around integrating Unreal Engine into the visual effects process.
I love that. And also, the only visual effects studio I know of that has valet, which I've always thought was a really great way to
The
introduce
parking
clients
in
to the
Culver
company.
City is tight. When you come to
Right.
Vancouver, it's a whole different thing. You're
I
on
always
your
thought that
own.
was great because I mean I came from the commercial world where again like you've got clients coming in paying $1,000 an hour to sit in a flame suite, and the whole
Yeah.
point is the experience. And I do feel in some places film they forget that in a way, and again like the reason many clients come back is because the experience and the relationships they build.
Yeah, I grew up in that world as well as a lot of people from Zoic Studios. We came from facilities like 525 and Inside Pix, the Alan Barnett's, Melissa
Mhm.
Barnett's place in Venice, doing a lot of Super Bowl work and music video work. And there was a lot of client service that went on in those places,
Absolutely. But I think
sometimes
it's
kind of
it's
over the top.
important. Yeah, I've heard stories. So I was just curious, like for you, do you want to give a bit of background about how you got started? Like for me, I'm always fascinated with everyone's story because you never know when someone's going to say, "Well, I was a lawyer and then I decided I like blowing stuff up," or
Yeah.
one of my favorites was being a sommelier in South Quebec, and then which I still don't understand why you would give that up to do visual effects. But yeah, I mean, for you, how did you first get started? How did you come across visual effects in general?
Yeah, my journey is a little bit more linear. From a very early age, I was, obsessed with science fiction, horror, fantasy movies, comic books, and books. That was my go-to. And then also the filmmaking process. I had, some experience that could be a career path. My grandfather was a screenwriter, and my uncle, creative director of an ad agency. So I had, from a very young age, a good amount of exposure to the filmmaking process, and had the wonderful privilege of being exposed to editing sessions, and I kind of knew all about it. And one thing that really fascinated me, because I was so obsessed with those genres at the time, and that was really the golden age. I was born in 1970, so I'm a 7-year-old kid sitting there watching Star Wars crawl for the first time.
I was literally going to say,
It's
7 years
like
old, you would have gotten to, yeah,
letting it wash over, and then all the other subsequent movies. And I became not only obsessed with the imagery, but how the imagery was created. And I've always been a creative person, an artistic person, and making my own artwork, and writing my own things, and also really fascinated with computers, and how they work, and how from a very young age, from the Apple and Apple IIe days, just really pushing to kind of try to find ways to express myself artistically on the computer, and really kind of voracious, looking all around, to Fangoria magazine, Cinema Fantastique like it was kind of a high castle. There was very few people doing it at the time. It was mostly all practical. And then when in the 80s, when CG started to kind of first come into the feature film world with Tron and Last Starfighter, there
hmm
was something about the design of that, the aesthetic of that, the possibility of that, that was fascinating to me, and I just wanted to find out how they did that. So that pushed me on a journey of trying to use the computing power that I had, mostly Apple IIe's, in our school, public school. This is a San Francisco public school computer lab. Aside from some, suspect copying of floppy disks, one of our great things was how to do artwork on the computer, and we started digitizing things by hand. I'd take comic book frames and redraw them by hand and put them onto a koala pad, which is a very rudimentary tablet of the time, and digitize them in by hand. I would make Revell models of the space shuttle or an X-wing, and then go with graph paper and measure it and draw out every cross section of it on the graph paper, then write down all the coordinates of it, and then type it in to a graphics program that would allow me to rotate the wireframe. So like building wireframes by hand. And at that point, there wasn't really a job there. Like, people would say, there's art, I can understand that. There's computers, I can understand that. But art in a computer, why? Like, why would why would you do that? It was such in the infancy of it. But I was pretty obsessed, and I kept on to that, and I decided the best way to express myself was to go to UCLA and try for the UCLA film program. So I did that, starting as a fine arts major, and then the way that it worked at the time is you apply separately into the film program. And so I was fortunate enough to be accepted into that program, and that's really where I got a very special, opportunity to work, across departments. Worked a lot in the animation department, hand-drawn animation. Worked a lot with practical filmmaking. The way that it worked at the time is unlike USC at the time, which was kind of more of a model of, and probably more practical model, honestly, of getting groups together, pitching as director, writer, producer teams, and then hiring your team from the student body like it would be in a studio, and the faculty acting as a proxy for the studio. The UCLA method was everybody makes a movie and everybody rotates crew positions on everybody else's movie. So that was really enlightening. The equipment at the time was very, antiquated. I mean, we're animating on the animation stands that they used in Snow White. I mean, we're using moviolas and flatbeds, magnetic tape, so it was all pretty primitive by some respects. But what I still appreciate to this day is that the feeling of the hands-on, like I almost like a sculptural feeling to filmmaking, like the physicality of it was really great. And I think that goes from everything to like splicing film together by hand with pieces of tape to like moving lights around. I think that served me well as a visual effects artist over the years, to have that physical model of a film set, because people throw around the word photoreal and organic, and I'm like, what they mean by that is they want it to look like a real movie, not like we're not doing cinema verite documentary visual effects. We're doing visual effects that have the same qualities and the same language. I mean, Citizen Kane is in the documentary, and Jurassic Park is in the documentary. There's the artistic decisions that are made, and those artistic decisions are made around practical conventions that have been going on for 100 years. So that hands-on feeling that I got through that film education was great. And I was still really interested in computers and doing computers on the side. I had bought a used Macintosh SE from my roommate who wasn't using his, and I used that to work my way through college doing graphic design mostly. So I always kept my hand in that realm and using it to print out stuff and print some stuff out and do some experimental stuff on animation stands. So I was always there. And when I graduated, I did, my normal rounds as a new film student, PAing and working, prop assistant jobs and commercials and working on set again. But during that time, I really wanted to get into the computer, of it all. I graduated in 92, and in 93, Jurassic Park came out, and I was just like, this is what it's going to be. Everybody's pretty clear. And I was continuing to make money in between film gigs doing graphic design. I was at a CD-ROM place where I was doing cover art for them, graphic design, font work, and marketing stuff. And the interface designer at the time was working on an SGI workstation that had a copy of Power Animator on it. And I would look over her shoulder and be like, that's what I knew from my magazine research. That's what they did. That's what they used in Jurassic Park. So I was like, okay, I got to learn this. There was no education. I'd never seen one at college. There was no training programs available. My training program was a manual, which is no doubt, like, it was super thick.
I
No,
remember many forests got killed in the
yeah,
days of
yeah,
Softimage and
yeah, exactly.
Power
Like,
Animator.
and then there was also no internet, some bulletin board chatter, which I'd always kind of been into, but not a lot of community for
Mhm.
sharing knowledge. So I asked, could I stay after my shift to go through the manual and learn? And I did that for a while until, some other, there was too much UI work, and they're like, hey, can you help out? And so then, not very long after that, I was doing that full time. And then my very first job, in film, television, visual effects, and I've been my entire career, which is now, going into, its 26th year of doing this, was in broadcast visual effects very early on. I was asked to help put a team together by Saban Entertainment to help them with their shows, mostly Power Rangers and the other Saban satellites. And that was there's a lot of folks that ended up um, all over the place. Producers, flame artists, in very high positions all around the industry. We all kind of scattered to the winds, and that was our crucible. That's where we kind of really did learn our craft. It was very fast and furious. It was very generalized from the CG perspective. We were doing everything from tracking the cameras to making the models to doing the rigging to rendering the shots. And it was all, again, on SGI workstations. And that started it out. That was like, and then I was freelancing, and I freelanced for a good 7-8 years. And I'd freelanced with Lonnie and Chris, the co-founders of Zoic Studios. We ended up together at Radium working on Buffy, Angel, Smallville, Firefly. And then as that contract came to an end, we decided to form our own company focused on the artist experience and delivering, high-end creative partnership, focusing on broadcast. And that's when we got into finishing up Firefly there, Battlestar, finishing up Buffy, finishing up Angel, and CSI, Once Upon a Time.
The list goes on.
You name it. Now we're heavily invested with the Berlantiverse, the Arrowverse shows. So Stargirl, Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, and also working a lot with Mike Flanagan, Bly Manor and Midnight Mass, and working on a new show for him as well. We're involved in Sweet Tooth, and we do a bunch of different types of work. We do a good amount of work where we are the supervisor and the sole vendor and the sole creative solution, from everything from character design to final delivery. And then we also work on a sequence level with the visual effects supervisors. Some of them have worked at Zoic before, and a lot of, there's a lot of community there. We, at this point, we know most everybody.
Yeah.
And they come to us because we have a working relationship with most supervisors, and we do sequence work on some shows that are multi-vendor shows. So we one of the things that gets asked about Zoic Studios in particular is, what's your specialty? And I think that that's something that we bucked the trend on from the beginning, because especially when we started, there was a feeling that you had to specialize. Like, are you a matte painting shop? Are you a dynamic shop? Are you a character shop? And that you were to focus on one part of the visual effects process and, make a reputation around that. And, people look at our body of work and they're like, well, there's a vampire and there's a spaceship and then there's a castle. What's the common thread here? The common thread here is that we get asked to do work that has, what I call a tonal specificity, like something that the creators need a specific vision that's unique to that show. And that's really exploded during streaming, because every streaming wants visual and tonal differentiation. You need to know, like, when you look at Midnight Mass and you look at Sabrina and you look at, other things that we have worked on, like Squid Game, like everything has this very, very specific tonal Sweet Tooth vibe. And visual effects carries a lot of weight in those types of shows. And you need somebody who can, we've always been about building boutique teams. And like I said, we talked about commercials a little bit. That was the commercial boutique was the the
Yeah.
hot term at the time for visual effects. And there's a lot to be learned from that. There's a creative continuity, a creative nexus of having a core team. And we've always tried to marry that with technology and smart scheduling and, utilizing the power of the art and the technology that we have while keeping that nexus of core team episode after episode, season after season, so that we can deliver these like really specific images to our clients. And it's been a fun ride because we get to do a lot of stuff. Like we're not the type of visual effects shop that just does like, oh, we're just going to do a bunch of matte paintings, that's
right.
what we do. Our pipeline's matte paintings. Like we do literally everything, from, we do our own previs a lot of times. We'll talk about that, I think. And, like I said, character design, visual effects design, all the way down, helping out, being very involved in the editorial process. It's just been a great experience. And so it's always been, from the very beginning of working in broadcast, I got that taste of that immediacy that you get in working broadcast visual effects at a time for, I'd say, good 12 years where broadcast visual effects wasn't getting a lot of respect from the rest of the visual effect. This is kind of like the redheaded child of the visual effects industry for a while there. And I think that that started to turn around, especially with streaming.
Yeah.
Probably about 8 years ago, about the time I was coming to Vancouver, people were like, "Whoa! Like the quality here is like." Really exceptional, and the storytelling is like amazing. The storytelling potential of using visual effects for broadcast, and now all the broadcast shows, all the streaming shows have huge visual effects footprints and budgets, and the industry is just on fire. Feels to me, I don't know, that it's mostly streaming and broadcast at this point, and I think that that's going to just continue because people love it. People love to be in their house, and the material is great.
Mm-hmm.
The material is amazing. Yeah, it's really engaging.
No, I think it's made such a massive shift because you're right. Like you're referencing Buffy and so many other shows that back then, if you're doing TV, then you really have to work within some very tight limitations, which doesn't give you much freedom. But that's the exciting thing now is some of the episodics you're dealing with are $1 million, $2 million for some very special case scenarios, and that was unheard of. So. Yeah. I love the fact that things have gone that direction because now you can tell long tail stories that if you were to condense it down to a film, you would lose so much. But on top of that, you actually have the budget to be able to do things right rather than like, hey, sorry, it was TV. Like this is the best we could do.
And it's interesting, Allan, because like after working a career in broadcast and I've worked on the film here and there and I participated in that and definitely seen it throughout the industry. Even though it hasn't been my main focus, what streaming is doing is way closer to traditional broadcast than it is to feature film. Mm-hmm. Like if there's a spectrum of budget and schedule, which are the two main differentiators, historically between broadcast visual effects and feature film visual effects, like with features having long time, long budget, and TV having the opposite, short time, short budget. Like I'm feeling that, streaming, with a few exceptions of these like really like marquee shows that are like 6-7 years in the making. But even so, the amount of material, it's like hours and hours and hours of material. Like a season of a 1 hour drama that has 12-10 episodes, like that's like 3 feature films. It's like 3 Dunes, like in the amount of time that it took to make half a Dune. You know what I mean? So it's like it's a way, it's
that's
way
the challenge, yeah.
And I think that one of the things that Zoic has paid forward is a creatively focused, versatile, nimble pipeline that allows us to deliver quickly and iterate quickly. And real time has been a huge part of that, and that's where our real time effort is really focused because. From what I see from other companies, just from my observation and from other, and that have come to Zoic, is that their challenge right now, moving the feature pipeline to be that nimble, to be that interactive, to be that iterative in the time frame, and are really highly invested. As we've been invested, for 2 decades of rapid turnaround, highly iterative, flexible pipeline. They've been invested in high quality, high output, long term, and very linear task stepping.
Mhm.
Very, very linear. Like, you got to prove this camera before I can light. And if you step back, that's either a schedule conversation or an overage conversation or both. And when you get into more complex things like character animation and such, those steps, like, well, you got to approve all the animation on an unfurred character. And once the fur goes in, if you have a single note, you can't go back. And we were never been able to do that. We've never had the luxury of doing that. We've had to be simultaneously firing on all cylinders to make our schedules and be able to do crazy things. Like, at the beginning of it, talk to people at the VES and other filmmakers, and they'd be like, what? That's not the way, that's the wrong way to do visual effects. You need to like get approval. But that's, back to the practical part in my experience in film school, that's not the way that filmmaking really works. And it creates a separation between visual effects and filmmaking, where it's like a different process that people hate.
Yeah.
And you
making it a factory.
You rarely hear creators say, you know what I really love doing? Working with visual effects and visual effects vendors. I want to do it as much as I possibly can. What you hear is, wait, we're going to try and get as much practice. Like, we're only going to do this when we have to. We've always been looking to change that. And I think real time has the potential to really shift that paradigm and bring the spirit, the collaboration, the language of practical filmmaking back into the visual effects process. Mm-hmm. That's the thing that I'm seeing as the biggest, like, there's LED walls. That's awesome. Love LED walls. It's so cool. But everybody's focus on that is like, now I don't have to pay for all these visual effects and like make a gazillion notes on key edges. Like, I hate that. I don't want to do that.
It's the other way around, though. It's more now we either create a separate department for pre-production, which ties into post, or you're basically involving visual effects way earlier on, which now are going to be involved in the whole process.
It moves it into a different space than it has been traditionally.
That's right. Yeah. I'm curious, just to talk about real time, like, for you, when did you first start to really kind of drink the Kool-Aid? I'll put it that way. But also in terms of both pre-viz, but also post-viz, and also now all the way through to compositing and finishing shots, like, how are you utilizing it in your production?
To the Kool-Aid question, I spent a good amount of time over the last 2 years going like, fad, this is like hype, it's not really feasible, it's never going to hit the quality level, and it's just something that people say that they're doing. It's a marketing thing. Mm-hmm. As I started to look into it and start to see what people were doing with it, and this is even of course everybody's kind of eyebrow raised up when The Mandalorian came out, and I was wouldn't be truthful if that didn't have maybe I should take a more serious look at this. Honestly, we talked a little bit about my background. I have that thing of like, if it's free and it's new and it's interesting, I'll just try it like on my own time, just to see what it's all about. And the proof for me was kind of immediately after using it. I was like, wow, this is potentially paradigm shifting if it's done right. There's a lot of questions. And a lot of questions that haven't been answered. And also just a kind of I've been doing a lot of, I've been truly operating as the president of the BC office. So I get a lot of involvement in hiring and purchasing of technology and looking at where things are headed as far as what's sustainable from an economic perspective and an environmental perspective, about all this machinery that we need to constantly get, and what it's for and what we're doing, and really digging deep and analyzing what it is that makes a visual effects company work and what makes it profitable, and how you get into the hardware you need to buy. And the one thing is, it's about iteration. I mentioned that that work, especially in broadcast, bites at the apple, being able to interact with the imagery, make notes and turn those notes around quickly. And it was very clear from just even playing around with Unreal that there was a lot of potential there, for disrupting so much, because it's almost bringing that process back to the way that, like integrating the visual effects process with traditional filmmaking techniques, because the way Unreal works. So I'd say for me, the proof was in the hands and the eyes of actually working with the software. And then an opportunity came up through one of our sales VPs who had a relationship with Epic, asking if we wanted to apply for the Mega Grant program to explore moving our, what it would take to integrate our VFX pipeline with Unreal. That sounded interesting to me. We had just done, a very, large, complicated, all CG character sequence for Stargirl, and I was like, well, what if we just did it again in Unreal and compared the two, process wise and quality wise?
Because you would never usually get to do something like that, because again, time is money, and people are way more money.
And it was during the pandemic. We were looking for something to do during a production, so we had the artist, so that was a silver lining to this very horrible situation that we're still dealing with today. But Epic thought it was a great idea, gave us the funding and the support to really do it. And through that process, learned a lot about, I've still got a long way to go, but I learned a lot about foundationally what Unreal can do for visual effects. And by the end of that project, I was just 100% into, my personal feeling is, if we were to look 5 years in the future, this will be the future of visual effects in a lot of ways. It's not slowing down, it's accelerating, whereas the linear pipeline's getting more complicated and more cumbersome and harder to integrate for visual effects facilities. Like, if you're a new if I was making Zoic today, I would 100% focus on real time. I couldn't see, like, starting it again and like trying to, do it the way that we did it. And we really struggled to like make licensing deals with Maya and get enough After Effects licenses at the time, and get enough machines to do the rendering, get enough machines for tape layoffs. And that was a real financial business struggle. And, the talent's coming in. The young people are coming in with these skills, because the software is free and there's a lot of information out there. And between other, softwares and like Blender, where they're getting a lot of feedback online, and there's a lot of education there, like the skill sets coming through. And so after kind of that whole revelation, anybody who works with me knows that if I find something that I feel passionate is worth exploring, I'm going to jump in all the way. So from that point forward, it's been building us up from some people in our office with interest in Unreal to a 30-person department that contains animators, technical artists, asset people, level designers, previs and editorial artists, and the whole art directors and creative directors, and the whole shebang. So it's been pretty rapid over the last 16, 18 months. And we've broken it down into 3 main parts that I think are important to the visual effects process. The first one is interactive visualization, which includes traditional previs, but we do our traditional previs to scale and start integrating right away things like LiDAR of locations and sets. So that goes into tech viz, where we can use it as a tool on set, whether we're doing it as a green screen or an LED wall or traditional visual effects as the end medium. We're using Unreal exclusively for that pre-visualization and tech visualization, just as an amazing interactive communication tool. And then we're pushing that forward into look development. Our first look development stages and our lighting development stages for our assets happen in Unreal because it's so interactive. And then we're also developed a lot of ingestion and plate technology that's able to bring our plates into the 3D scene, the shot plates once they're shot, and then conform the previs and put it into the plates to match what editorials cut in for their temps to give a very, very clear roadmap to what the final visual effects are going to be. And at that point, we know exactly what's going to be rendered where, and it's an execution. We got all, like timing, lighting, direction. We've got blocking animation all included in there. And along the way, it's all based on interactive sessions with the creative stakeholders. It's me or another supervisor, another artist with the Unreal Editor open, listening to what they're saying, move this, move that, slip this animation, move this light, make this shot a little bit longer, split it into 2 shots and move it over here. We're doing all that in engine, in editor, in real time over multiple sessions. And that's where I feel, aside from the fact that it being a simulation, the lenses are simulated, the lights are simulated, the light profiles are simulated. When you're done, everything can be translated directly to the set. Light, color, temperatures. And since it's all simulated, it's not, we've looked at previs and tech viz as kind of like fancy, better storyboards for a long time. This feels different because it is pre-visualization, but it's also, a lot more, especially when you're integrating with motion capture, a lot more blocking information, a lot more lighting information, a lot more information to give to special effects, a lot more information to give to stunts. You can measure where the green screen needs to be, and if you bring that level even onto set in the most rudimentary way, just even on a laptop, you can throw measurements down on it and tell them, okay, put this here. And that's been, just a fantastic, really interactive way of pushing the creative process forward. And once we get to the end of that, in the post-viz stage, where we've got the pre-viz against the state and against the plates, we've developed the lighting and maybe put a little bit of compositing polish on it, those shots stay in the cuts for a very long time. And it gets rid of an issue that's I think
insert visual effects, slate that pops in.
Insert visual effects. Somebody sees that, gets freaked out because they don't know what it is, and then they're rushing the pipeline to get temps in there, and you're going so fast and pushing so many band-aids on it, and nuke or whatever, using whack elements from reels, or going outside to shoot something on an iPhone just to throw it in there to give them an idea what the visual effects design is. And then when you finally get to breathe in that, that's how we've done temps traditionally. There's nothing to pay forward. It all has to be, it's actually more problems when it's worth, because legacy information from those temp comps gets thrown into the finals. You have to it's even better. Like, I'm just like, nuke it from orbit, start from scratch. The temps were a different show. But this pays forward directly. And we've written tools to take this. And if we are going into our traditional linear pipeline, we're exporting everything, light positions, light colors, FBX's cameras, everything back into Maya, Houdini, wherever it needs to go. The dynamics people have size, intensity, speed from the Niagara temps that we put in there. And that's a big thing. Like, how many wedges have we all looked at of dynamics just spinning, going like, maybe a little slower, maybe a little faster. Okay, I'll do a new wedge. Let's look at it tomorrow. Like, like that's very different than taking that Niagara parameter with the director there going faster, faster, faster. Oh, too fast, back. Oh, that's it. It's exactly what I'm talking about. This is exactly how fast I want it to be. I find that when they have that agency, the creatives have that agency in the process, they tend not to go back. And in the other way, where you say like, okay, here's a sphere that's got the speed. Imagine there's particles there, but there's just a sphere going around. Is this the right speed? Yeah, I guess, but it's just a sphere. Sure.
That's right.
Then you show them the dynamics and they say, well, it doesn't look the way that I expected it. Like, well, you approved the sphere. And they say, well, that and that's what gets creators frustrated with the process, and why they tend not to like it. This is different. And this is the real, like, whatever I call it, genie out of the bottle, try to put the toothpaste back in the tube. Like, once you do these interactive sessions, to go back to the other way of like, here's a grayscale thing, make one note, this is your one chance. They're like, sad trombone. Like, this sucks. I don't want to do this.
It's kind of like what we were talking about earlier with Flame, Inferno, even the Quantel systems, HAL, Smoke, Henry, you name it. The whole point is that you're getting to go in there and sit on a nice couch, kick back, but direct someone in terms of what you want. And it's very different if you go to desktop compositing, where it's like, okay, well, things aren't as real time, and usually it's let's wait to tomorrow for dailies to see the next result. It's a whole different way to approach it. But that's what I think is such the appeal, tying everything in together, and especially where post production isn't post anymore. Because as you mentioned with previs, typically that was such a disconnected thing where either the studio themselves will have an internal team, or you outsource to a dedicated previs company who are going to do all the animatics. But a lot of the time it's about visually just getting the idea across. So sometimes you'll get things in VFX where then you're like, okay, well, we're trying to mimic what they did, but it's not working. Then you actually get the files and you're like, okay, the missile is here, the smoke is 2 miles away.
Yeah, the camera's like
whatever tricks they want to do.
Yeah.
But in a lot of ways, it's forcing you to actually solve those problems, the first time around, and it means that everything just flows throughout the whole process.
And that's changing too. There are some cases, again, like I said, like sometimes we do the whole thing from visual effects and we're the supervisor and the sole vendor, and sometimes we're a sequence. But and that's starting to happen with real time in this interactive visualization space, because we will get something from the third floor that's been done in Unreal, and they worked with they did all the thing, and they did a lot of layout, and they did a lot of blocking, and they need to take it to the next step, and then we're getting it for maybe even final pixel, or just we're doing the temps. Like they'll give us their Unreal file, and then it feels like it's a true passing of the baton to a real thing that we can actually pick up where they left off and pay it forward. I'm looking at like 3 pillars. There's the interactive visualization portion. There's a virtual art department. That's the buzzword there, was called VAD, where in this space is really transformational, because this is a different deliverable. Like visual art department is completely, we've never delivered this way before. We have, from the very beginning of Zoic Studios and from the very beginning of visual effects, delivered frames, 24 of them generally per second. That's what the commodity is that we're getting paid to deliver. This is an Unreal level delivery. We're delivering it to potentially another vendor, to be put onto an LED wall, to do real-time compositing, to do AR, VR. So we're doing some of the stuff that we've been doing for Fox Sports, the stuff that we're doing for the TV shows that we're on that have, and the streaming shows that we're on that have LED walls. And it's a very different process. It's asset development, it's optimization, it's blueprinting, it's being able to build a visual effects machine through, like, we approach it that way, like give the customer the blueprint functionality they can really use to quickly and interactively access what they need to. So if it's sky changes or weather changes, or being able to move and edit the scenery around. I mean, every different application of this has different parameters that need to be identified and put into the deliverable. So it's a completely different way of bidding. It's more of a mix between like a software development and a visual effects delivery than it is a traditional visual effects delivery. So that's super duper interesting, and we're getting we're feeling a lot of the creativity that we've brought to our asset development, character design, and environment design is really on display here. And we're doing it's allowing us to enter into areas that we traditionally wouldn't get into, like AR applications, which is kind of a new way of storytelling, and it's a new avenue of ways to deliver and to get visual effects out there, which is really exciting. And then finally there is what we're calling Final Pixel, which is using Unreal Engine as the sole and final render engine for sent to compositors for visual effects, instead of another traditional linear CPU renderer like V-Ray or Arnold. Now every project that comes into Zoic Studios goes through a determination process of whether it's going to go through the linear rendering pipeline or the Unreal Final Pixel pipeline. And we're feels like every week we're converting more and more. And in the future, there's a bunch of super double top secret stuff that we're doing right now, but in the very near future, you're going to see a lot of Final Pixel rendering from Zoic Studios. which means taking that interactive visualization component, that virtual art department component, marrying them together and render. We've been working directly with Epic, to render, images, and that LED walls are great. Not every show can afford to build a Mandalorian sized volume. And not every show wants to take on or has enough visual effects to benefit from, or a green screen with a tracked camera, and direct visual feedback, like what we've been doing for Zeus for years when we were, back in the day we were in Once Upon a Time, that type of direct onset compositing, which is something else that we're getting into, which doesn't get a lot of as much airtime as LED volumes because it's still a green screen there.
It's the buzzword.
It's cool.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of that going on too, which is real-time compositing using Unreal Engine and camera tracking. But again, that's a show has to have enough visual effects need to make that worth their while. Every show needs rendered images to some degree, to some degree. And, final pixel rendering, I feel that's where the growth is going to be, the exponential growth. And we're seeing just a lot of efficiencies, not just in the render times, but again, having everything in one place and kind of condensing and unifying the pipeline in a way where people are doing, multiple tasks, going over multiple task areas. Because what happens is, and we have two types of people that come into the real-time department: new people who have never worked another way before that are doing really well and teaching us, what it's like to grow up in a world of working in real time. And then people are coming from other departments in visual effects who see this as a new way to creatively express themselves in their work. And what they're finding is, and what they're enjoying about it is a much broader, because you're doing lighting and animation and layout at the same time.
Yep.
We don't we have generalized task areas. People tend to be more technical, or they tend to be more asset oriented or more material oriented. But the material people still do a lot of level design and layout and lighting. And, the people who are very sequencer oriented, we're highly leveraging for a lot of this visualization, the sequencer functionality in Unreal. So we have people who are kind of shop makers who are doing a lot of the previs work, like story folks. They're doing animation work and lighting and layout as well, because that's the way that it goes. So everybody's kind of, participating and collaborating in a way where the task lines are a lot more blurred. And there's a lot of controversy about that, honestly, in the industry. The artists are, some artists are, a lot of artists are super psyched about it and love it, and a lot of artists are like, I've been specializing in this one area for so long, where does that leave me?
That, I think, is always the problem with technology, is that by deciding to do what we do, you have to embrace the fact that you do need to adapt. You can't just say, well, all right, I'm going to learn 3D. What, we're not using Indigo anymore? We're now moved on to desktop PCs.
We're not building models anymore. We're not shooting in motion control anymore. And
I'm not using NURBS for modeling. The whole point is for people to innovate and look at what's coming down the pipe. And for me, I think that there are those people who get very comfortable being like, the one trick pony, in the sense that this is what I know, and it's scary. Everyone's scared of change, but at the same time, it's a chance for you to really look at what are the upcoming trends and be, the ones to jump on those before anyone else. And if anything, look at ways that can make your life easier, not be scared of how it's going to, disrupt the way that you've been doing things in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, and I don't have a crystal ball, that that this will be an industry standard, coming up very shortly. The pure economics of it from a visual effects standpoint and the creative possibilities combined make it something that people will very seriously be looking at over the next years. Yeah. Like every single facility that I've talked to, people at the facility is like, oh yeah, we're starting up a real-time department. Like there's nobody saying like, no, this is not happening. We're not doing anything in this area. Like everybody's doing it. Everybody's got an LED wall test. Everybody's got, says they're offering virtual art department. We've always had the benefit of, again, one of the benefits of working in the broadcast and streaming space is we run through projects a lot more quickly. So we've already had an opportunity. We've already broadcast Final Pixel. We did several Final Pixel composited scenes for Superman and Lois, which was the new Berlanti Superman show last year. And we're continuing to do that and gaining a, you know, really solid reputation as being able to deliver final pixel. And also we know that there are certain, you know, I'm not going to try to render volumetric interactive clouds in Unreal just yet. I'm not going to try to do water sims in Unreal just yet. You know, there are a lot of other things, but, you know, the digital double technology in Unreal is quickly gaining, you know,
Yeah.
a quality. And I think when 5 comes out, people are going to start, it's going to accelerate even more. And then, you know, I've been working this long enough, like 5 isn't the end. Like my question is, what does 7 look like? If 5 is going to look like this, what does 7 look like? And when's 7 coming out? 5 years, 6 years? You know, like I don't know anything about. I'm just talking, you know, out of the clouds here. I don't know anything about Unreal's path or their numbering, but like, you know, what I'm saying is like, like just look at video games when, you know, if you're Zold Diamond, the first PlayStation came out, you're like, wow, you couldn't even imagine what PlayStation, you know, 3 and 4 and 5 were going to be like.
That's actually what I was going to bring up. Method, the first time I'd ever heard of Method back in 2001 was they did a PlayStation 2 commercial, and it was for PlayStation 5. And I thought it was really genius in the sense that it was essentially saying, you know, this is what's down the line. Here's our roadmap. But, you know, right now, check out PlayStation 2. And it's just a great way of kind of just like with the iPhone or some like virtual reality. The first time I ever put on some goggles, I instantly was excited about what's going to happen 3 years, 5 years from now, not just what I'm going through at the moment. So it's more about what is possible down the line.
Yeah. And we're looking forward to that too. Like, I don't know what this, you know, what we call it, the metaverse, the spatialization of the internet, you know, that's
the big buzzwords.
Yeah. That's those things could have a dramatic effect on what visual effects will be called to do in the future. There's not really a lot of room for the traditional visual effects film linear pipeline in that space. You know, like it doesn't work for our AR clients, for example. Like that's all going to be Unreal. We just helped a company called Famous Frames with the Carolina Panthers AR project that got some nice buzz with the Panther jumping. I don't know if you saw jumping around on the stadium and grabbed a flag, and you know, it was a very cool thing. Their mascot was interacting with the environment in a real time tracking way, and we helped them with asset development, light, you know, some lighting stuff and animation. And that was a deliverable for us, and they did all the conceptualizing, and they did all the, you know, it was their baby, and we were able to deliver material to them in a creative relationship that in some ways was very close to what we do with our broadcast clients, but also very different, and no other way to deliver it, deliver that experience, that narrative experience, than with this at this time Unreal Engine or real time. And I also have to say, one of the things that's also transformational. And I don't want to sound like I'm ungrateful for everything that we've gotten from our linear vendors, or because they've been amazing to us. They allowed us to have Zoic Studios. You know, it was miles different when we started it was miles different when we started Zoic than when I first started in the industry with, like, you know, $100,000-$200,000, you know, SGI workstations and $75,000 power animator licenses with $35,000 add-ons for IK rigs, you know, stuff like that. Like that was not achievable. We couldn't have built Zoic in that environment. It was a PC revolution, and the foresight of these companies to get their prices in line, and the hardware companies to give us the hardware that we needed to make Zoic Studios. I will be eternally grateful for that. I don't want to say that's bad, and they continue to be great partners for us. But the level of interaction that we get from Epic, and the support and the interaction that we get on the software and development side is unparalleled. Like, it is miles different than any other software company I've dealt with in the time that I've been doing this.
I think that's a really valid point that most people don't consider. A lot of the times, like, for me, it's more about the relationship with the companies who are developing the software, because it's very easy to be like, oh, there's this new software doing XYZ. And the thing is, you got to look at, well, how many people do they have? Like, what's their reputation so far? Because if you're investing time and people and, of course, money into software, it's about knowing that they're going to be around 5 years from now, and really understanding their roadmap. And like, for you, is that something that you think a lot about in terms of, like, obviously Epic is a good example where They're financially stable. They've been around for 25 years at least in terms of being a game developer. They've got the foresight to swallow up the right people in the industry to ensure that they're evolving rather than following everything, all the trends and the tech. So then there's other companies who might be doing some cool stuff, but at the same time, like it's more of a shaky investment to put your time into them rather than someone that you know is actually going to be around for the bigger long
I'll
haul.
ask for Epic. There's two things I wanted to say there. The first thing is the Epic itself, and I'll give you an example. One of the other things that we took the time to do internally during the pandemic was to fully convert our CG compositing pipeline across the board, across our all of our software packages to be ASIS, fully ASIS compliant, render in
Mm-hmm.
full ASIS. And not being broadcast, we kind of got a bit of a pass on that one because we've been able to push it back a little bit, because even we get some ASIS shows and then not some ASIS shows, and but we've decided that for quality reasons, for other reasons, we're going to do this. And as we were doing this, we were working with Unreal. How do they work with ASIS? And they have on their staff the gentleman who invented ASIS.
That doesn't surprise me at all. Actually, I'll
and,
just quickly
and
interrupt.
they were able to set up a personal meeting with
Mm-hmm.
us and our technical people to
With
understand
him.
the process, and to really, and it was very like, it wasn't like, here's what you do and here's how you build your pipeline, but it was like such an important conceptual. And
Yeah.
also just like, there's a lot of competition for us to keep our employees, and that type of engagement where you have access, where they're just giving very generous with their access to their experts across the board, is inspiring. It
Mm.
makes people want to do, more stuff. And I've been saying since the beginning of Zoic, like, one artist who really cares about the work that they're doing is better than 10 artists who are just like, I don't give a shit, I'm just waiting for mama bird to put a task in my lap, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to go home.
That's right. They're just phoning it in. Yeah, Epic. Even 10 years ago, I remember like a lot of my friends while I was at ILM all left and went over to Epic, and I remember one of my buddies emailing me being like, "Yeah, I didn't have a company car for the weekend that I arrived, so the CEO lent me his Ferrari, and he attached a bunch of pictures of him driving around North Carolina in a Ferrari," which
That's
I just thought
awesome.
was humorous. But I've always been impressed with who they decide to absorb. And like my friends over at Quixel as a great example, but just
Yeah.
the right people, even with the mega grants, like there's just one thing I'll say is like looking at YouTube when they make a big announcement, let's say acquiring Quixel or certain other companies that they have swallowed up. I'm always impressed by the comments because let's just, I'll put it out there. Let's say Autodesk or some of my other companies that I work with, there's always going to be a lot of negativity around what are you going to do with this company rather than just being always 100% positive. And I feel like that just kind of gives a bit more confidence behind them knowing that okay, they're in good hands, not to say anything negative about anyone else, but it's just they know that they're going to be utilized in the right way to encourage them rather than compartmentalize them.
Yeah, and I think that another thing that, there's another side to that coin. Like, you're absolutely right. Epic's using their economic power and their vision in the marketplace, I think, really well at this point. And I've been really honored and just privileged to that. Like, without them, this wouldn't have happened for us. So I have to thank them for it. But the other thing that they do really well, and then other smaller softwares out there, like Blender comes to mind, directly,
Mm-hmm.
is fostering a real sense of community. I mean, for me, visual effects has always been at least 50%, probably more like 75, 80, about the community of artists and the sharing of creative and technical information. And like I said, without the internet, for all the folks that grew up in that era where we were all communicating together and all we had was that small
Mm-hmm.
community of sharing tips and sharing techniques amongst each other, and then expanding that through you worked with Alex Alvarez at Noman for many years, passing that knowledge on to the next generation and them passing it on through Zoic, all the people that we've worked with. I think community is important, and some of the larger softwares have kind of lost, they pay lip service to it. But when you look at, how active the Blender community is and how excited they are, and
Yeah.
Epic has captured that lightning as well. with their community spotlights, and they spend their resources communicating with the user base in the visual effects and game community all the time in a very and there's a conversation, a community conversation there between the developers, the software, and the users that I really appreciate. And I think that causes, users to gravitate towards it. And, especially, for us, when we're looking at, we're a company that I've had, like, one of the other great pleasures of Zoic is that we're able to integrate a lot of new people to the industry into our pipeline, pretty quickly. And that pays dividends. And one of the most, awesome experiences I've had is working with people who came to Zoic as an intern or their first job in the industry that have been here for 8, 9, 10, 12 years and are now visual effects supervisors in their own right.
Mm-hmm.
That's an amazing experience that not everybody gets to have. I'm super grateful for that. And, and that takes a type of person that comes in with a level of excitement, engagement with it. Like I did, like I said, like, I want to do this, like, that's the drive. And community around the software that creates it can help foster that drive. And also, there has been historically, and not to get too political here, and Zoic has been talking a lot about this, one of the things that impacts diversity in our industry is access.
It's a great point.
It's just the fact that Unreal is free helps a great deal. And I think that that's important to the survival of our industry, to bring people in from everywhere and to give people real opportunity. We still need to figure out some very difficult problems, economic problems, about how to get hardware to people that need it. Especially, with public schools, like I said, California kid in a San Francisco city public school, we had 6 Apple IIes just sitting there that had sent the computer from Apple that nobody knew what to do with. My buddies in the computer club and I sat on those things all the time.
That's right.
Like, day after day, after school, for hour after hour. And I don't think that happens anymore.
There's like Google Collab, a few things like that, which I think are giving people access in a way that's great. But you're right, like it definitely, access is always going to be one of those things that makes things a bit more difficult when you could have so much potential to do so many things, but if all you have is a pen and paper, because of lack of access, it's hard to really innovate or get on that bandwagon.
Yeah, so there's some work to do there, definitely. There's education, there's hardware access, but the fact that the software is available for free and the community is so strong and there's so much information out there about how to use it definitely is a step in the right direction. I appreciate that.
I love that. I want to respect your time. I guess 1 or 2 quick questions I was curious about. You mentioned before, obviously, going to traditional film school, and the whole revolving, essentially, of disciplines in terms of people's responsibilities. And obviously coming from the broadcast days as well, where you don't get to specialize and say, okay, well, I'm strictly just going to be a character animator, or I'm going to be a hard surface modeler specifically for World War II tanks. Yeah. For you, because I'm always fascinated with this, like, how impactful do you think it is for people to really learn the spectrum of everything before they decide to get boxed into a certain thing? Like, my perspective of people's careers has always been start as a generalist, niche down at some point, but then eventually as you move into a CG soup or a VFX soup, you need to start to, vary a lot more, so that way you have a better scope of the whole pipeline. What is your take on how people should start out?
Yeah, I think that getting a taste of everything, I agree with you 1,000%. And I think that, when we're working with new people, and there's a lot of parts of the practical film process that are missing that we try to educate people with at Zoic, like lensing behavior.
Yeah.
What depth of field is, why you would choose this lens over that lens, lighting direction, lighting fall off, and how that affects scale, and the issues around painting with light. Those things, I think, even in a general way, are essential. And I put it this way because I've worked with people who struggle with this because they may not have gone to film school or art school or came into the visual effects from another thing, and they've kind of picked up some buzzwords along the way, but they don't quite understand how it all fits together. And here's what I think is a great exercise for any visual effects artist. Take the movies that have visual effects, or even not visual effects, just shots that you think are cool. Grab a frame, look at it, and describe what makes it exciting for you, why you think it's good. And then try to figure out what they did, what conscious decisions the artists that worked on this did to give that feeling to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it could be that general, because it can get wrapped up in technology, can get wrapped up in technique. That is a downside of all the YouTubery. Like, why did you do this? A YouTube video said that that's the cool way to do it. And I'm like, this is a time when you need to use your eyeballs, not your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And that focus on why we're doing it from a general standpoint, aside from the task area, well, like that's for everybody in any task area. Because there's a lot of people that can push buttons a lot faster than I can and work a lot more efficiently than I can, and they don't have that conception of what the overall arching filmmaking techniques are. Because you need to know, if you're a CG supervisor, you need to know what the compositors are trying to do. If you're a compositor, you need to know like what the lights in CG do, so you can ask for what you need when you need a revision to make your comp look good. So everybody kind of needs that type of information. And especially if you're going to go into a supervisor, you need to know that. And as far as the technical stuff goes, it's probably a good idea to have a general working knowledge of even departments that you're not in. And if you're going to be a supervisor, you kind of have to know a lot. We're pretty good at Zoic of being pretty even-handed. Like our supervisors, usually our path is CG supervisor to DFX, CG supervisor / comp supervisor to DFX supervisor to visual effects supervisor. And we're pretty evenly split between where they come from, CG supervisor or 2D supervisor. But when they make that transition, that's the first thing, like, how much do I need to know about this other department that I've been interfacing with? And my thing is, you don't need to know every button in Houdini to be a visual effects supervisor or DFX supervisor if you're coming from 2D, but you need to know what to ask for.
No, just to touch on that, because I think you're 1,000% correct. It's up and down, because the more that you learn where things are coming from, the more that you can actually speak to those people in terms of how perhaps you might need things better. Let's just talk about effects like destruction. Hey, modelers, can you give us closed, clean meshes rather than, something that's just kind of hideously thrown together? But at the same time, the more that you learn about where things are going, the more that not only can you communicate with them, but you can also think ahead as to how you could make their life easier. And as you move up, you're right, you're going to need to, let's say, working in visual effects as a VFX supervisor, you're going to need to learn how to work on set in terms of relationships as well, but how a lens works, all the other aspects that tie into what you're doing. Because if you don't know those things, then you're not going to know how to receive things or what to do with them. So it's always about the 360 of like what's immediately around you. Just to wrap things up again, thanks so much. This has been really awesome to chat with you about all things visual effects.
I could talk about this stuff forever. I hope you could tell I'm super passionate, and again, keep using this word, but just grateful that I've had the opportunity to do what for me has been a lifelong passion and talk to people about it is always fun.